Hello, and welcome to Arvest monthly webinar. Today's webinar is Trauma-Informed Supports for Early Care and Education in Arkansas, led by UAMS professor and Arvest co-director, Dr. Nikki Edge, along with Melissa Sutton, who is the program coordinator for Arkansas State University Childhood Services and a longtime partner in our work in early care and education. My name is Anna Kate Bogards, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know a little bit about the Arvest program and do some housekeeping announcements. Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, or Arvest, is a state-funded program at the UAMS Psychiatric Research Institute, and our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who have experienced trauma. We work closely with multiple partners to build a more trauma-informed state, and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. In the last few years, we've become more involved in supporting early care and education initiatives, some very exciting ones, and a few of which you'll get to hear about today. A few housekeeping announcements. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll probably get to those at the end of the presentation, but feel free to ask those in the question box, which you should have usually at the right part of your screen. Somewhere on your screen, you should have a little question box where you can ask your questions. Also, a note today about video and audio. There are a couple of videos in the presentation, and for most people, this should work fine, but for those of you who either can only hear the audio or can't hear the audio or have any kind of issues with that, we'll be sharing links to these short videos that you can watch later when I send an email out after the webinar, so don't worry about that too much. If you're interested in earning a CEU, just be sure to stick around to the very end and I'll give more instructions on what you need to do to obtain that. Also, we're recording this webinar, which we'll upload to our YouTube channel, and that's a place where you can also find some of our previous recordings. All right, that's all of the housekeeping I have. I'm going to turn it over to you, Nikki.
Great, thanks, Anna Kate. Good afternoon. It's so nice to be with everyone this afternoon. As Anna Kate mentioned, I'm Nikki Edge. I'm a professor in the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine, and one of the things that I get to do is work on a number of early childhood programs that are aimed at increasing social emotional supports and trauma-informed approaches in our programs that serve our youngest children, and also get to serve as co-director for Arvest. So excited to be with you today, and I'm going to let my colleague Melissa introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Melissa Sutton with A-State Childhood Services. As Anna Kate said, my position is a program coordinator, and I coordinate several projects that have to do with supporting children and teachers in social emotional supports. And so we are tickled to be here today with you and always enjoy working with Nikki, who I've partnered with on lots and lots of different projects. So we're glad to be here.
Right, all right, I'm going to see if I can get the slides moving here. There we go. All right, we're going to spend just a few minutes talking about the prevalence and impact of childhood trauma on our youngest kids in Arkansas. We will not do a lot of that. I know for many of you have probably joined us before, and I don't want to spend a lot of time preaching to the choir. We'll spend most of our time talking about a couple of our initiatives to help our youngest children with experiences of trauma succeed in school. We're going to be talking about an expulsion prevention initiative that serves a lot of children with experiences of early childhood trauma, and we'll talk about a trauma-informed organizational change program that we work on. We will not be sharing any detailed accounts of childhood trauma or anything like that. Nonetheless, when we think about trauma, and we think especially of trauma with young children, it's a topic that can be upsetting. Many of us have had our own experiences of trauma, so of course we encourage you to take good care of yourself during this presentation and step away if there's anything that's upsetting, and just rejoin us as you are able. So just to dive right in, again, to those of you who've joined us on prior webinars, we're going to talk just a little bit about childhood trauma in Arkansas. And many of you are familiar with this. These are statistics that may not surprise you. I first want to, though, spend just a moment to define what I mean when I use the word trauma. I know that that word means different things to different audiences. Here in a medical institution, it means something very different if you are talking to someone in the emergency room, for example. But when we're talking about trauma today, we're going to be talking about trauma as defined by what we call the 3 E's of trauma. So I would say I've experienced a trauma when there's the first E, an event that's threatened my life or well-being, or the life or well-being of someone I love. I experienced that event in a way that it overwhelmed my capacity to cope and left me with lasting effects on my physical, emotional, social, or even spiritual well-being. So events experienced as overwhelming, leaving lasting effects. Those are kind of the 3 E's, and that's what we mean when we talk about trauma today. And you see some of the events on your screen that make up that first E of trauma, potentially traumatic events. These probably don't surprise you. We know that before reaching adulthood, approximately 2/3 of children in Arkansas will experience at least one such event. Many children will recover with the help of their natural support system. We become most concerned when these events start to pile up in children's lives, as is the case for about 1/4 of our children in Arkansas. Our best estimates suggest that about 26% of Arkansas children have experienced 2 or more potentially traumatic events in their lives. That's actually the highest rate of any state. We particularly worry about children when their support system is limited, as it may be if the trauma is occurring in the family system. Melissa and I are going to be talking a lot about early care and education. And if you think about this from kind of the perspective of a caregiver and children in a classroom together, if there were 20 children in an early care and education classroom, we would on average have about 6 who've experienced multiple traumatic events, such as those you see on your screen. And we know that our youngest children do not escape this experience. We know that by age 4, more than 25% of all children will experience a potentially traumatic event. And the victimization is actually highest for children that are infants, birth to 12 months. 45% of all maltreatment deaths occur in this age group. We've studied children under the age of 5 whose parents are seeking treatment with them in our mental health clinics here at UAMS. And when a young child and parent come in for treatment related to trauma, the average number of separate traumatic events they have experienced is 5. 5 completely separate types of traumatic events, types of maltreatment, for example, or other difficult events. So often more types of trauma that they have experienced than years in their young lives. I think that our collective understanding has really changed a lot in recent years, but here on your screen you see kind of some of the historical misconceptions about early childhood trauma. You know, we used to often think that very young children won't remember or be affected by trauma because they can't articulate that memory. And while it's true that young children may not be able to tell us about their experiences the way that older children can, we know that it becomes embedded in their brain development and in their bodies. We know that when these young children and their families seek treatment, most will have clinically significant emotional and behavioral concerns, and that parenting stress is high. We used to think that kids will, inherently bounce back, and that they'll always recover with time. And we know now that trauma has a significant impact on development and can have long-term consequences even for young children. We used to think that if we don't talk about it, children won't remember, they'll forget, they'll move on. And unfortunately, we know that if children are struggling, if they do have symptoms of PTSD, for example, then those symptoms will tend to maintain or worsen if we don't intervene. And thankfully, I think our collective understanding on these issues is different than it was just a few years ago even. So as I mentioned, the science is so clear now that trauma can impact many aspects of child development that make it harder for kids to succeed in school, beginning even in early care and education settings. We know that experiences of trauma can negatively impact brain development, leading to that kind of underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, that thinking, focusing, planning part of the brain. We know that when kids are experiencing trauma, the part of their brain focused on fear and anxiety and threat assessment can be overactive, and this can undermine their ability to think, problem solve, make good decisions, and undermine their educational experience. And this again is happening in the earliest years. We know that there's evidence now that early childhood trauma can be even more impactful on brain development than trauma at later ages, because this is when the brain is developing so rapidly in these early years of life. For example, the language centers of the brain peak in their development in about the first year of life, and the executive function center of the brain is building out most rapidly in the toddler and preschool years, slowing down by age 6. And so that's why kind of trauma in these early years can disrupt these normal developmental processes, including healthy brain development. And we know, again, and I'm not going to belabor this since so many of you have been on webinars with us before, but we know that trauma can impact our physical health, our immune response, lead to trouble with managing emotions, making it harder to develop trusting relationships with adults and peers. And of course, we know that trauma is a risk factor for just about every mental health diagnosis. Behavior is often the concern that gets noticed earliest. That may be especially true for some of our youngest children, who show us how they're feeling and doing through behavior when they don't always have the words. So we know that children with experiences of trauma often get into trouble both at home and at school for their behavior difficulties. At school, they might be displaying impulse control issues. They may perceive threats that aren't there and lash out in response to a threat that maybe isn't real. They may have a harder time focusing, paying attention, following directions. And all of these are reasons that kids with experiences of trauma are more likely to repeat a grade, drop out, be suspended and expelled from school. This process of pushing kids out of our educational system when they're experiencing symptoms of PTSD and other mental health concerns begins very early on. It begins even in infancy and in the toddler years. And we'll be talking more about that in a moment when Melissa picks up. We know, though, that the good news is that children's experiences of trauma and adversity are only ever part of the story of their lives. We know that their positive experiences, especially positive relationships, helps mitigate risk and promote recovery. Their relationships are particularly important. We know it's through those repeated interactions with a sensitive, responsive caregiver that children come to view themselves as lovable and worthwhile and learn to master their environment. I remember as a student in the 90s, there was a team of researchers from the University of Minnesota who led a groundbreaking longitudinal study of mothers and children. And one of the publications that they put out said that the capacity for resilience develops over time in the context of environmental support. And I think that was the first time I had been kind of exposed to that idea of what builds resilience. And 30 years of research since has confirmed that that simple statement really is true, that the capacity for resilience develops over time in the context of environmental supports. And so to foster resilience, we're really needing to equip the adults who surround children so that they can support them, help them recover, so that we can build the skills and capabilities in children that will help them succeed. And this certainly means parents and parent figures. But we would really be remiss if we forget that most children spend much of their waking hours, probably more of their waking hours, in the care of others than in the care of their parents and in their homes. So teachers and other adults who care for children can be really important resilience builders. We also, though, know that children most in need of adult support from their teachers and other caregivers often show us their needs in ways that are very hard to manage in a classroom. And again, as I've been emphasizing, this begins very early on, even in infancy and toddlerhood. So in terms of available supports for children in Arkansas, we're going to start with supports, that are available to our youngest children. And one of the supports we're going to tell you about is Arkansas's Expulsion Prevention Program for children birth to 5. So you're probably having some sense already of what preschool expulsion prevention has to do with childhood trauma, but my colleague Melissa will explain further and kind of drill down into that a bit. And Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Let's try to get this to advance. Nikki, you might have to do it.
Yeah, I had to kind of click on the screen and then use my arrow down button. So, but if that doesn't work, I can try.
Okay, all right. No, I think I'm going to need your help.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. Okay.
So, I got it too much.
So why focus on expulsion and suspension? The problem of preschool expulsion was first highlighted by our colleague Walter Gillum at Yale, who compared the prevalence of expulsion in our K-12 system to that in pre-K and other child, found that rates in pre-K were 3 times higher than that in K-12, and rates in other types of child care were 14% higher. He found that about 10% of pre-K teachers had expelled at least one child in the past year. Our data in Arkansas is almost exactly the same. In 2015, we found that about 9% of teachers had expelled, and that number went up to 43% if you included suspensions. What has begun to be increasingly clear since this early research is that a key risk factor for suspension and expulsion is childhood trauma. This has been found in national surveys. For example, Zing and colleagues used data from the 2016 National Survey of Children's Health to demonstrate that controlling for demographics and other risk factors for every additional ACE, adverse childhood experience that Nikki mentioned, every ACE that a child experienced, their odds of being suspended or expelled increased by 80%. The highest odds were for living with domestic violence, which resulted in a 10-fold increase in odds of expulsion. It is particularly concerning that children with trauma, particularly trauma related to the relationships in their home, are at risk of expulsion. We would hope that school would be the place they can count on safe, nurturing, and consistent relationships. But expulsion represents a break in those relationships, a parting of ways between a caregiver and the child and their peers. Trust me when I tell you that children are too often well aware of what is occurring. They get the message that their caregivers are choosing to end their relationship with them because of their behavior. And you can imagine that this sends a powerful message. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of what some call the preschool to prison pipeline, which is somewhat rooted in this idea that we are setting the course of a child's life early on when we exclude them from educational settings at the earliest ages. The truth is there's not a lot of research that focuses on the long-term outcomes of children expelled in pre-K. But what we do know is that early expulsions are a strong predictor of expulsions later in the school career. And from there, the science is clear that those expulsions predict just about every negative indicator imaginable, from school dropout to teen pregnancy, substance abuse, and juvenile justice involvement. So let's look into this a little bit more. Of course, you may be thinking you have never heard a preschool teacher use the word expulsion. You may have heard some other ways we talk about suspension or expulsions, such as, please pick your child up early today. Don't bring her in tomorrow. Why don't you have him join us for half days for the next few weeks? Our program just isn't right for your child. We can't provide the services that he needs. We have to disenroll your child. Whatever we call it, the outcome is exclusion from the early learning environment and a disruption to relationships that the child has built. This practice has got to be addressed. In the past, thanks, Nikki. In the past 7 or 8 years, the Federal Department of Ed and Office of Child Care have urged states to take action, and Arkansas did just that around 2015. So what did we do? We established an expulsion prevention work group to design a system of policies and supports to reduce expulsion. Nikki was actually one of the co-chairs for this group of people, for this work group, and she co-chaired with a health leader named Arlene Rose. To distill that work down to the most important points, the work group recommended the expansion of a rule that said that early care and education providers who accept state federal dollars may not expel children without asking permission from their funder. There's also ADE is involved because of they are in charge of the ABC pre-K. This covers about 75% of early care and education in Arkansas. That idea of asking permission was designed to be an alert that this situation is in need of support. And so the work group designed a system called BehaviorHelp to support teachers and families when there are behavior-related challenges in childcare. Nikki will share more about that and some of our evaluation results in the future, in some future slides. But I will brag on Arkansas a minute and say that Arkansas's early and effective response is still serving as a model for other states today. Nikki and I and others at DHS have provided technical assistance to about a dozen states by now who have sought to replicate pieces of our model. So let's look into the details of BehaviorHelp a little. So anyone can make a referral to BehaviorHelp. It could be parents, counselors, teachers, directors, anyone can make a referral. So it's very important to us that we want to make sure that you know how to access this resource and can guide families to it. So you see the website, www.behaviorhelponline.org. So please feel free to share that with others. So they go to the website and submit a request. The BehaviorHelp system is all about partnerships. I show this slide not so you can absorb how our expulsion prevention system works, but just so you know that this system allows to provide a single point of entry for addressing social, emotional, and behavior concerns in childcare. A support request comes in through that website you just saw, and it is followed by an interview with the DHS staffer to learn more information that could be helpful so that we can provide the correct support to whoever is making the request. Then we have a 3-tiered system of supports with 3 teams working together to handle these requests. We have a team at DHS who handles low-level kinds of concerns. For example, if the request states that it's the first day of school, the child is crying, they've never been to childcare before. So the interviewer can handle that and suggest, let's give it a little time. They've never been in care before. So those are the kind of things that they might help if a request comes in. We have another team of highly skilled technical assistance professionals who really know social emotional development. They are with A-State University Childhood Services, which is the team that I coordinate. And we handle about 2/3 of referrals and can provide support even with pretty serious challenging behaviors or classrooms where teachers are untrained, unprepared, and not equipped for even typical child behavior. We have Nikki's team of mental health consultants through a program housed in the department at UMS called Project Play. They respond to referrals where the behaviors are especially severe and there are already multi-system involvement. So this system allows us to make really wise use of all the expertise we have in the state by carefully matching the needs of a teacher and child to the right supports. So let's look at these 3 teams a little closer. So the first team that I mentioned is the triage specialist at the division of child care and early care education. As you see here, they all have other roles. Some are family support, pre-K specialist. It just kind of varies. And so this work is as other duty as assigned that so many of us are familiar with. They receive the online request for support and complete the structured phone interview to gather all the information so we can make sure that we provide the right support. They provide support or assign to A-State or to UAMS, to the technical assistants or the early childhood mental health consultants. So also we represent, you can go back just for minutes, they are also represented at a weekly staffing that Nikki and I attend. There are several people from different roles that we meet every Monday and just try to make sure that we are doing the best we can for all the referrals that come in. So it's important work to all of us. So Nikki, you can move to the next one. Thanks. So our technical assistance is provided by a group of professionals that operate out of Arkansas State University, as I previously said. Some have a role as a conscious discipline coach. Some work to do general TA or were part of the team that supported centers in moving up the quality rating ladder. Now they spend part of their time handling behavior health cases. We have about 15 TA providers. They were really handpicked for their skill set and knowledge related to social emotional development and their ability to do that teacher support in the classroom. At this level, the focus is really on how we create the kind of classroom environment that is going to support all kids, and arming the teacher with strategies that are likely to work for cases they are seeing now and in the future. Talking about schedules and routines, how we give positive attention to children, finding moments of connection to build relationships, how we teach calm down strategies. So while a concern might have been about one specific child, TA provides to the center as we are giving a focus for more general here that supports that will work for all children. Okay, so this is a video where she will talk about the importance of a visual schedule. I'm not hearing it, Nikki. Are you?
I'm not hearing it either. I'm not sure why, because it was working just a minute ago. Anna Kate, any tips?
Yeah, let me pull it up from YouTube, and then we'll see if that audio works better.
Right.
Something that works.
Nope.
All right, so a lot of our students, we know that the visual component is very,
Is that working?
very important.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also being able to track their day, because these kids have a lot of anxiety. They need to know what's coming. They need to know what's next. I've been playing with Picture schedules for a really long time, just trying to find something that worked, that was easy to utilize in the classroom, and that seemed to work well for my kids. And this is probably my favorite one that we've done so far. And basically what we've done is I've broken up our day into the morning and the afternoon, because I want each step of our day outlined. And if you put that in one long stream, the kids would get a little bit desperate. So we break it up in chunks, and so by the end of the morning I say, oh look, our day's halfway over, the morning is done, it's time to move on to our next list. So what happens is I really try to be conscious of the students that seem to be struggling that day. So the ones that have a rough drop off, they're crying for their mom, and they seem to be having a hard time connecting with either the teachers or the students that day. And this becomes our special way to connect throughout the day. So I have intentionally put it higher above the child's reach. And I do that because a lot of the kids in this room need positive physical interaction. So I'll pick them up, we get that close proximity, and they get to come and shut these windows as our activities are finished. And then they can announce to their friends what our next step is. And they really do. They love that time of having physical touch with a purpose. It doesn't feel invasive to them. And if I ever had a child who didn't want to be held, I haven't had that happen, but there's room for a chair right here, so that if they needed to climb to a chair and I could just stand here to help make sure that they stay safe, that's an option as well. But I've never had a student actually take the option of the chair. They always want to be held. So throughout the day, we just close it. Like I said, I try to be very detailed, so it's not just going from centers to outside, because there's that very crucial step of cleaning up. So, and the same thing with going to lunch. We go to the bathroom and wash our hands first. And my kids really do cling to that. They need to know that step by step, and breaking it apart in the morning and the afternoon does keep it from getting overwhelming.
Okay, thanks, Anna Kate, for making that work. And as Anna Kate said earlier, if you would like to, she will put the link in, I believe, but also you can go to our Conscious Discipline in Arkansas YouTube channel and see lots of videos. So, so we've talked about the role of DHS in behavior help and the role of ASTA. And now Nikki's going to tell you about our third team that she coordinates.
Right. Thanks, Melissa. I love that video. I love that, how thoughtful that teacher is about her approach to work in the daily schedule. And you can just see how beneficial that would be to the kids in her classroom. So as Melissa mentioned, most cases are supported by her team at A-State, but about a third of the cases that come into our behavioral help system have kind of some red flags on them, where we know that even with a really skilled teacher in a really well operating classroom, this child has had some experiences or needs that need to be kind of looked at more individually at that child level to help that child be successful in the classroom. For example, maybe they are getting have different developmental delays and are getting developmental services. They might already have a mental health diagnosis. They might be in foster care, or we might know from talking to the teacher that they've experienced some really difficult things in their young lives. And in those cases, we do try to have the case be served by a mental health consultant through Project Play. Project Play is operated in partnership with several community mental health centers in the state. And we love to be able to staff Project Play through those partnerships, because it means the people who know their communities best are providing services. And then we also are able to kind of fill in the gaps around the state with some UAMS team members who travel all over the state to provide these mental health consultation services. And so it's a really nice combination in terms of a staffing model. So what happens is that a mental health consultant goes on site to the child care program with the consent of the parent and the involvement of the parent, and visits weekly for the better part of the day for about 12 to 16 weeks. So kind of the first goal is to just really observe. We're doing child screening, we're gathering information, and really just trying to figure out what's going on for this child and in this classroom. And then we're really working with the teacher to develop an individualized plan for how to kind of support the child in the classroom, to build the child's social emotional skill, to manage the challenging behavior in ways that are effective, and that kind of minimize disruption to the classroom. We do a lot of referrals for community resources, certainly referrals for therapy services for the families, because this isn't therapy. This is really consultation to parents, teachers, and administrators to help children be successful in the classroom. And then we're in there every week kind of supporting the teacher in implementation of the plan that we developed together. And then also kind of prioritizing, making sure we're helping the teacher think about taking care of themselves. We're helping administrators think about organizational wellness and how we support teachers through this challenging work that they have. So I'm going to share a little data from the evaluation of behavioral health that we've gathered over the past 5 years since this program has been in place. So here's just a little bit of data about who gets referred into BehaviorHelp, you can see that our referrals are overwhelmingly for young boys, which is kind of consistent with the national research on who's most at risk of expulsion. And then you can see kind of that our racial and ethnic breakdown generally matches enrollment in publicly funded early care and education. Again, consistent with the national literature, older preschoolers tend to be referred more frequently, but even infants, as you can see, are identified as at risk from time to time. And then a big lesson learned that we kind of didn't fully anticipate when BehaviorHelp was launched was, again, as we've been talking about, this issue of childhood trauma. We didn't actually even set out to collect data around childhood trauma when we first began, but there was a question on the interview form that DHS completes with the teacher or the referral source that said something like, is there anything else we should know about this situation or about this child and family? And experiences of trauma just came up over and over and over again. And, you know, when I say trauma, you know, I've been working around the child welfare system for a long time, and yet these are some of the most heartbreaking and difficult stories I've ever heard. These children have had really, really difficult experiences, and so kind of in light of their experiences, it's not shocking that they would be having a lot of challenges, self-regulating, you know, and kind of being able to manage through the day in a group care setting. The good news is that we are able to avoid expulsion about 97% of the time. Nobody likes expulsion. Teachers, administrators, you know, it's a last resort for them. They do it, the research says, when they feel stressed and hopeless and don't know what else to do. But with support, that option can typically be avoided. We know that teachers are typically quite welcoming of the support, and in fact, our surveys this year suggested that 98% of teachers reported they would recommend BehaviorHelp to a colleague. We gathered a little bit more in-depth information on the cases that come to Project Play for mental health consultation because we do have that parental consent, and we're operating kind of, you know, more at that child-specific level than the classroom level. You can see here that in just about 3 months of consultation, teachers report a significant reduction in conduct problems and those kind of acting out behavior problems on our standardized measures here. You also see significant increase in kind of pro-social behaviors, the taking turns and the getting along with friends. What we also know is that it's no wonder that teachers were struggling. When they fill out these standardized questionnaires, we see that about 85% of the kids score like as clinically elevated. And so a mental health intervention really is warranted for most of these children. So as I mentioned, our overall expulsion rate when cases get referred to BehaviorHelp is very low. About 3% of children are expelled during the BehaviorHelp intervention period. And we set out to explore a little bit more about that. Who is it that is expelled even when support is brought to bear? National data would suggest racial disparities, and also the expulsion of children with complex developmental needs, developmental delays, and in need of services. The good news is that in the context of BehaviorHelp, Black children are not more likely to be expelled compared to white children. We do not see racial disparities in our data. What we found was that expulsions are more common in settings that are lower quality, which makes sense, and where teachers are less trained, where I think that obviously makes sense. And then there's trauma. As Melissa mentioned, there is national data that says that in general, children with more traumatic experiences are at increased risk for expulsion. But we had hoped that in our case, in a sample where every child has support of a technical assistance provider or a mental health consultant, that we wouldn't see this to be the case. Unfortunately, not so. In the context of BehaviorHelp, those who have experienced more types of traumatic events or are in foster care, that still was a risk factor for expulsion. For example, we found that children in foster care make up 10% of completed behavioral health cases, but represent 29% of those expelled. So they are definitely overrepresented in that expelled group. Those are troubling pieces of data. And I'm going to turn it back to Melissa, and she can tell you about some action steps that we've been taking to ensure that we continue to work on a system in Arkansas where our children's needs are better met, and we can provide the best supports possible for children with experiences of trauma.
Thanks, Nikki. So given these findings that even with support, children with trauma continue to be at increased risk of expulsion, we knew we needed to do more. So the same teams that support BehaviorHelp, A-State, UAMS, at this point, Melissa and Nikki, we began to look at what we can do to build trauma-informed early care education environments where children with trauma are just as likely to be successful. We really want to demystify trauma-informed care. We want to help teachers understand that trauma-informed care is not just the purview of mental health professionals. So together we have developed an intervention called FIRST ECE, Fostering Informed and Responsive Systems for Trauma in Early Care and Education. And we have been testing and refining it in a series of pilot studies. We're very excited about this work. Practically speaking, how do we create a truly trauma-informed educational environment? We are really putting a Band-Aid on things if all we are doing is dealing with child behavior. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network tells us that a trauma-informed school should be working in a number of domains to create long-term organizational change. It is about the ways that teachers support students, but it is also about much more. System change requires policies that support it, procedures that are clear, ways to identify children who need more supports, partnerships across the school and with the community to provide that support. Our team has come to believe it takes intensive work to facilitate meaningful change, but we are beginning to see that it is possible. The model here is one that we are testing in multiple school districts and Head Start systems in urban and rural communities in Arkansas. It involves a 2-year commitment, training for all school personnel, more intensive training and in-classroom coaching and problem solving for classroom teachers, and the development of a trauma-informed care policies, procedures, and partnerships. We first studied this in 2 large school district programs, one urban and one micropolitan. 13 physical locations with 43 classrooms and 87 teachers. Over 2 years, teachers got 22 hours of training and 8 coaching visits. We facilitated what we call change team meetings once a month. Change teams are made up of key leaders and representatives of every type of position in a school. Teachers, assistant teachers, front desk resource officers, nutrition specialists, parent support staff, just anybody who has a role that's represented in the school setting. Their job is to explore the changes that need to be made in their system that sit outside the classroom. Is there a disciplinary policy that needs to be changed? Something about the physical environment? These things are the purview of the change team. And then we have a sustainability strategy involving facilitating peer support meetings in year 2. You'll see here this great graphic that shows our 5 S's. We orient all school personnel to what we call the 5 S's of trauma-informed care. Classroom teachers get in-depth training and coaching support to implement these in their classrooms. Specific techniques to build supportive relationships, particularly with children who seem less connected to teachers and peers, kids who seem to resist relationships. We also focus on how to create a feeling of emotional and physical safety in a classroom. This involves things like promoting extreme predictability, like Rachel was talking about in that video, Children always know what will happen next and have visual cues to help them navigate the day. That is so important. We use safety language. Teachers learn to say things like, my job is to keep you safe. Our classroom is a safe place. Your job is to help me keep it safe. Trauma, by definition, means that we have overwhelmed someone's capacity to cope. Struggles with self-regulation, managing emotions and behaviors are very common. We teach children to identify their emotions, to know what they are feeling, and to be able to say it. I feel frustrated, angry, sad, or scared. And then we teach them to calm down from big emotions. One of the most common techniques is through teaching diaphragmatic breathing. Kids are great at this and learning to help one another implement these strategies. We also work on social skill building. This is important for children who may not have had great role models for conflict resolution, problem solving, and friendship skills at home. All of these can be taught if they are part of the classroom curricula and consistently modeled by staff. And then the final S is self-care. Teaching is a high burnout profession, and working with children with trauma can increase the likelihood of burnout or even secondary traumatization if there are not organizational wellness and self-care strategies in place. So now we have Savannah, who's going to show you part of what she does to support children in self-regulation as one of the 5 S's.
I don't have audio on this one for some reason.
Can't hear it?
No.
Okay. Let's try again.
This one has been very helpful in my classroom.
There we go.
We had a child in the classroom that was very frustrated and ran to the Block Center. And one of the other children in my class noticed this, and so she went and came and grabbed the star wand from my table, took it to her, and did like this. And the child that was frustrated said no. So instead of forcing her, saying, come on, take a deep breath, come on, let's calm down, she sat back and away from her and did 3 star breaths. And eventually the child noticed that, and she turned around and she took a deep breath by herself. And so I noticed that having the star wand, having her use this, she wished her well from afar, and that really helped the child calm down. I get the star out, and I ask them, what do we do when we see this star? And everyone says, stop, take a deep breath, and relax. And we do that 3 times every day. And so I tell them where I put it every day in case they need to come get it, if they need it, or if they need to take it to a safe place, or if they need it for another child, you know exactly where to come get it. And we just go over that every day at circle time. To me, it means that you really, really care about them. And even though if someone's having a hard time, no matter what it is, if they hurt someone or if they did something they weren't supposed to do, I know that they don't have all the words maybe to say or all the things, they may not know how to deal with that yet. So I know by wishing them well, they know that you care about them and that you want them to do what's best for them.
Thanks, Anna Kate. I do strongly encourage you to go to the YouTube channel or follow this link so that you can hear exactly what Savannah does and how she supports the self-regulation in all of the children in her classroom. So, Nikki?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I love one of the things that she said in that video, which is that I teach this every day. And well, that's part of what we see in our evaluation results from First ECE, is that it's not that teachers prior to our arrival in their program were never doing things to build children's social emotional skills or never used a visual schedule. It's that it needed to be more intentional, more consistent, and more predictable. And that's what's part of what's so helpful to children with experiences of trauma. So let me just take a step back to the bigger picture and tell you about this busy slide you're looking at. So there are no evidence-based approaches yet to creating trauma-informed schools. There's no manualized approach. There's no step-by-step guide. There's best practice frameworks and very helpful guidance that we can use. But this is a very kind of new line of research. And so we wanted to be sure that we were evaluating everything we do every step of the way. And so our first question was simply, could we pull this off? This is a lot to ask of teachers that are very busy and have plenty on their plate. So would it even be feasible? And so the answer to that question in our pilot studies has been yes. Typically, we can get teachers about 6.5 out of 7 planned coaching visits and 7.5 out of 8 peer support meetings. So they tend to engage really, really well. A lot of teachers are really hungry for this kind of information. One of the ways that we have tried to evaluate our impact is by looking at knowledge change as it relates to childhood trauma and changes in classroom practices that are the kinds of strategies that we've been talking about. You know, teaching feelings, use of specific relationship building strategies, ways that we teach and practice self-regulation. And so we survey teachers periodically throughout the 2-year intervention that we're with them, and can compare kind of the frequency of their use of these kinds of strategies over time. And what we see is that they typically move from doing these things occasionally or sometimes, if you think about like a Likert scale on a questionnaire, to in between the answer options of often and always. And so just like Savannah is saying, we do this every day. It's that kind of consistency that I think is so helpful. We know that consistency and predictability are especially important elements for children that have experienced trauma. We know that our less experienced teachers have benefited most from what we've taught. If we look at teachers who had less than 10 years of experience and teachers that had more than 10 years of experience, we see greater gains both in knowledge and in use of these strategies among our less experienced teachers, which I think kind of makes sense too. Melissa talked a little bit about what we called a change team, which was responsible for implementing system changes designed to support a more trauma-informed organization. And so here are some examples of the broader organizational changes that the change teams we have worked with have been able to implement. We also survey change team members, and about 90% of change team members report that they understand their role, feel the process is inclusive of all voices, that they made good progress, and that they feel equipped to continue this work once we are gone. So you can see that a lot of focus in our change teams on crisis supports, on tiered systems of supports. How do we identify needs of children? How do we be able to focus on getting children who need more of the supports that they need? How do we identify the community resources and better use our local mental health resources, for example, to support families, as well as a lot of emphasis on teacher wellness. We've also gathered some qualitative data, and I'm just going to give you a few little snippets of that. These are a few themes that emerged from the qualitative data collection, where teachers were asked to describe the most important changes they made or saw in their classroom as a result of this project. One theme emerged around strengthening relationships. And so here are a few quotes about how teachers have brought more intentionality to relationship building, particularly with children who need it the most. We also had a theme emerge from the qualitative data about the effectiveness of teaching about feelings and really recognizing that building emotional literacy is the first step to increasing a child's ability to self-regulate. So we had lots of teachers tell us that that's been really impactful in their classroom. Similarly, as we saw earlier in the video with Savannah, that teaching of self-regulation techniques, teaching breathing, lots of teachers told us stories about how they implemented calm down strategies into their teaching and the effects that it had on all children. As you kind of saw a hint of in Savannah's video, it's also great for kind of building empathy and friendship skills in children who are not struggling with self-regulation, because they can notice a friend that's struggling and offer a way to help. So just revisiting that quote from earlier, I hope you have a sense now about what it looks like to invest in teachers so that they can be resilience builders. So as trainers and technical assistance providers and mental health consultants, we can't pop into a classroom or a home and just magically fix a child. You know, we can't pull them out for a therapy session and, you know, and poof, the problems are gone. What we can do is build the capacity of teachers and parents to provide consistent, nurturing, responsive care and intentionally teach these kind of social and emotional skills on a daily basis. And this is how we really see that change happens. So we have our contact information on the slide. And if you need to access BehaviorHelp supports, again, we've got that website there. And I'll turn it over to Anna Kate to talk about the CEU code.
Right. Thank you, Nikki and Melissa. That was a really wonderful presentation. It even helped me understand more about how these programs work together and or how they work. And it's just such a wonderful resource for our state. We have just a few minutes left for questions. So if any of you guys have questions, if you want to put it into the question box, you have a few minutes now. While you're doing that, I'll let you know about your certificate, your CEU, if you need it. I will be sending an email out to all of the participants today, and it will have a link that you can click on, and it's a form that you can fill out, and you put this code in there, 2607, and then you will get your CEU emailed to you shortly after that. So I'll leave that up here for a moment. Are there any other questions? Well, Nikki, oh, here comes one. Okay, yes, the slides will be available. I'll whenever I send the email out, yes, I will send a PDF of the slides. That was one of the questions. Let's see. I'm getting some positive feedback that it's been a great presentation, so that's good.
Thank you all for having us.
Good deal. Well, it looks like that's about it from everyone. Thank you again, Nikki and Melissa. This was a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. Stay tuned for the next Arvest webinar in August, also about schools, but we'll be moving on to K through 12 focus. So stay tuned for that. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.